Hi, this is Real World Audio, and I'm showing you the PSAudio DLIII deck at the point where I decided I will just stop modifying and tweaking it further because I really miss it and want to put it back to the system. So now this is where I call it a day or call it 2 weeks. I've been working on it for 2 weeks, every day a little bit here and then. And as you guess, the hours just add up to quite a lot. So that's one reason why you do not see such tweaks in commercial gear, because they require just an insane amount of work hours from workers, which would literally double, triple or quadruple the cost of an equipment you are buying. And also when you do tweaks, they only are worth to do when the rest of your system is already on point. So if you have not perfected yet your loudspeaker, your interconnects, and especially the power cord for the deck, then I would say it's a total waste of time at that point, or maybe not. You will hear a little bit of benefit, but just a fraction of what its potential is. So now let's just recap a few things. Looking at the PCB itself, you see that all the ICs got crystals on them. I run out of rutilated quartz crystals, which are there on the chip, for example, and the rest, that's a relay there. I put amethyst crystals. They are also piezoelectric, and they are in the quartz family. So you can see that the capacitors, the SMDs, I changed all the SMDs around that IC, and the blue ones are film capacitors. They are 1 microfarad film capacitors. They replaced the 1 microfarad electrolytics, and though all of them have that copper shielding on them. Here they also have a couple. Those ones I decided not to change any more of those caps, because I was just tired doing all of these things. Actually, I wasn't tired, my eyes were tired. So one day I will just pull it out again and start working on it. That capacitor there, that poor little bugger, that's a little bit finicky, because accidentally I put that capacitor in that place and I had to desolder it, and when I took it out I ripped the PCB trace, and it's just held there by a breath. And so I will see, maybe it works, maybe I have destroyed it. We shall see what we shall see. And here you haven't seen this yet, what I did to these capacitors. So these are the power supply caps. I changed the originals to fresh ones. This is just like an oil filter change in a car, or air filter change. You have to do it once in a while. I would say for audio gears, like if you have 10-year-old gear and they have a power supply filter caps, change them, because they wear out, and that's mandatory, just as an oil change is mandatory on a personal vehicle. And you see they also received some crystals on them to help cut the radiated electromagnetic field. And what I have added as dampening is just these bands of cotton strings. So what they do is just I made several loops around them, and it just tightens them together. And when you actually flick the capacitor, it has a different sound to it, a different resonance than what it had without these cotton coils. So basically, if you wound cotton tightly around the capacitor, it is an easy way of doing a wooden frame around the capacitor. So the other tweak would be to encase these capacitors in a block of wood, And or what you can also do, like use bamboo instead, because bamboo is already hollow, you don't have to hollow it out. Just find a piece of bamboo that you can fit right on top of your capacitor and just fill it up with hot glue or Elmer's glue to fill up the void and just to bond the capacitor to it. Also, if you remove that outer plastic foil, so here that black thing on the capacitor, that's not the body of the capacitor, but it's, you see, I am reaching with my nail under it, that's why it makes that sound. It is just a nasty piece of plastic, and if you remove it, it will sound much better. And that's especially true with these fine little Elna ceramic capacitors. Remove it, and if you put the copper shield around the aluminum body, it will sound better than leaving that on. So why didn't I do that? For one extremely simple reason, is that if you remove that outer heatsink, then you don't know anymore which is the ground side of that electric capacitor. And I can tell you from experience that I have killed a few capacitors just because you don't know anymore which is the ground side, which is the hot side, and if you switch it up, the cap will blow up on you. What you can do, what I did, is use an alcoholic marker, you know, those alcoholic pens, to mark the negative side, but when you use isopropanol to clean up, it will wash off clean. So, and if you don't notice it when you have washed it off, then that's it. So out of laziness and practicality, I left the bands on, and also for another reason, that's because of that I will be able to read the values, what sort of capacitor it was, and when you remove that plastic film, then you will no longer be able to tell what was the manufacturer, or when it was made, what are the values, etc. So that's pure laziness. And underneath, what you see right there, I haven't shown this yet either. So those are the diodes. Those are the rectifier diodes that rectify the AC coming from the power transformer to the board, and I have changed those. The old ones were fast recovery diodes, I think FR307s. I will have to double check, but I think it was that, and I changed it to these glass bead avalanche diodes. I got the tip for these from Rishi, my buddy in Australia, and he had great very good results in his deck when he changed his FR diodes to these buggers. So that's what I did, and as you see where I have those diodes on those, I put that wooden piece under the diode, and that's because this way the body of the diode is sitting in a piece of wood, and it's not just resonating in the air or resonating on the PC board. And this was also Rishi's experiment. He did that with transistors. When you have a transistor like these guys, these are mounted to heatsinks, but in many decks you have transistors that are just in a free air without heatsink, and if you just glue a piece of wood onto them, that makes for a really nice change in the tone, much more natural sound. Same thing is true for diodes, and that's what I'm doing here. As you see, I got rid of the cheap thin, very thin, hairline thin copper cables, and put in those gray ones are Kimber cables, and the blue one is an unshrinked heat shrink hiding a silver wire. So I'm basically paralleling two Kimbers with a silver. The silver is, I think it's about gauge 20, and that's for all of the, so it's the two high voltages are that, and the center one that has 3 Kimbers instead of the 2 plus a silver. So they have been totally beefed up, and as you see, there's a piece of wood under the cables, and that's hot glued onto the chassis, and the cables are resting on that piece of wood, so they are not touching the chassis, which resonates and vibrates, but they sit on a nice piece of wood. I could make it better by putting another piece of wood there and just hold them down tight so that they don't resonate in the air, plus hold down this ground wire as well so that it is not allowed to move freely in the air. And you would say that's humbug, but it's not humbug. Why? Because when you have a conductor and you put it in an electromagnetic field, that electromagnetic field will just create a current in your conductors. And you would say, where are electromagnetic fields? Here, right here. This toroid is generating electromagnetic fields. These capacitors are also radiating electromagnetic fields, and these wires are picking all that up. And even though this is just a ground wire, but if you induce current into a ground wire, that's going to just jack up the entire electric network inside, because you have introduced something into the ground. You are actually screwed like a light bulb. Okay, it's not such a big problem, but it does remove a lot of the really fine details, and that can easily be the difference between a good sounding deck and a great sounding deck. As you see here, for the transformer, I have attached these wires with this cotton, just wound a couple of times around the transformer, so it snugly holds them down, because otherwise, because of the EM field that this is producing, they would just resonate around here, because there's magnetic field is just making them flap. Maybe just a few micrometers, but that's enough to introduce some alterations into the signal. Also, you see, the transformer is sitting on wood, and I added additional wood pieces onto the chassis, and the function of them is that now, you hear that? This is metal, and when I knock on it, it sounds as if I was knocking on wood. If I close my eyes, I would think that I was knocking on wood, and that's because I have glued quite a few wooden blocks onto that piece of metal, and that totally changed its resonance characteristics. So I'm now halfway towards putting this unit into a wooden chassis. One more thing that I haven't shown yet is that I have removed the RCA jacks. You see, that's where the RCA jacks were, and now you see just silver wires hooked up there, and they go directly to interconnect. So I put like two pieces, these are two shims actually. I hot glued one onto the back of the back plate, and then hot glued the interconnect onto it, and then hot glued another shim on there, and the whole thing is just holding it tight, because you cannot just leave the interconnects hooked up there, because once you tug on the interconnect a little bit, it will rip it off from your circuit board, and you can say goodbye. In worst case, you can just redo your interconnect. In a better case, you can redo the interconnect. In a worst case, you can rip the circuit board and say goodbye to your dear cherished DAC. So that's what it is, and here, as you see, these are my DIY silver interconnects. I have promised that I will share how to make them, and I will do that sometimes when I get to it. These are Eichmann bullet plugs in the end, so you see they have just minimal metal in them, and I prefer to use as little metal added to the connector as possible. Actually, my best version of this cable is using the bare wires as connectors. You can do that, but it's really fiddly, and now I'm just a little bit too convenient for that. And yeah, so let me show something more. I haven't shown that I have changed the input wire for the transformer from the original cheap wires to this Kimber wire. As you see, this is a Kimber speaker wire, and I'm just using it to run the 120 volts AC to the transformer. and now I'm just getting like massively upgraded current handling capacity running to this poor bugger, who now will be a very happy bugger. And as you see, I also have additional rutilated quartz crystals there, and that's a uranium containing crystal. It's a little bit radioactive, the big one there, and you can introduce those into your components as well if you are brave. And the purpose of that is that the low levels of radioactivity really help the release of electrons and then just give you a boost in the power supply. So here we go. You see the power switch, it's hooked up, and now at the center of the camera you see that hairline piece of wire there. So now there's a thicker silver piece of wire going there, and that continues in that barely visible gauge 32 silver connector, and that gauge 32 piece is what I'm using instead of a fuse, because no matter how good audiophile fuses you are using, you still have the end bells of the fuse that just really tear down the sound quality, and you have the fuse holders, which are junk at the best of cases. And you see I have that capacitor there on top to protect the switch, and I have the same cap there between hot and neutral, so to filter out the microsecond long spikes which occur in an AC line set. So that's my power conditioning that I use for this unit, because it's really sensitive for any kind of switch mode noises. And last thing, oh, one more thing here. This is the top of the unit, and you see I put a steel points ERS paper in the front. So behind it, can we see? No, I did a good job. We cannot see. There's a circuit board, and that's taking care for the switches, because the switches, they operate that circuit board there. And you see that, yep, that connector that's running right there, and that tells your deck in what mode you want to run your deck, and also selects your input selectors. I mean your inputs, what you want to use for input. You want to use the RCA, or you want to use the optical, or the USB. Oh, that's the USB, and that's the optical in. Okay. So the last thing, what would Paul McGowan say of me doing this to his deck? And I think Paul of PSAudio, he's the founder of PSAudio, he would be absolutely thrilled, and he would say, come on, János, what are you waiting for? Let's plug it in and listen to it. And I think for him it is a joy to see that one of his older decks, because this is not a new deck, this is a very old PSAudio deck, and it's really just a testament to PSAudio's quality, that the PSAudio decks are still running and being used after 15 years, 20 years, and people love them and cherish them, and I truly love this deck, and really my heartfelt thanks for Paul for creating it and providing it for us. And for those of you who think that this is not a very high-end deck and there are much better decks on the market, yeah, sure, for 10 times the price and so on, but I find that this deck, even though it doesn't use any deck chips that are famous for a natural sound or any special things about it, but he created a deck in this deck that has a very natural sound, and it's just a joy to listen to. And when you read all the reviews that were written on this deck and all the testaments of people who use this deck, everyone is really all over the moon about how natural and how musical it sounds in its price range. It was truly a find, and I have to tell you guys that I have bought it used, and my reason for that was that I had a an Ultralink, a PSAudio DLIII II deck before that, and I was tweaking it and I killed it with my tweaks, and that's why I was really sad about it. And then I got this DR3 instead on eBay, and the person who sold me actually cried when he sold it, and he had to do that because he had a baby born, and he had to get rid of most of his stereo components, and yeah, for that sad practical purposes, but otherwise he would never have parted with it. And thank you everyone for tuning in for this video diary, and I'm just going to stop now, put it together, and find out if it works. I hope it works, and that my mishap there with that capacitor did not destroy the PCB. If it did, I might need to do some crazy microsurgery, but I'm not giving up no matter what. So please like, subscribe, and I really hope that many of you now feel the urge to open up your decks and just do capacitor upgrades, do your oil filter changes, and hopefully I've given ideas on what you can do to elevate the sound quality, make it more natural without spending hundreds of dollars on it. Just some little bit of time from your own and creativity. Bye bye.